Sometimes, what breaks us isn't the betrayal itself, but the way someone walks away without ever looking back. She was an exceptional heart surgeon. He was the CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, a love that once felt destined until the day he chose to leave, trading it for a marriage alliance and a seat of power. But what he didn't know was that she was carrying the greatest part of his life. 6 years later, at a prestigious conference in New York, the entire audience rose to their feet for a woman. But when the spotlight hit, all eyes turned to the little boy standing beside her, with a gaze that carried a part of the father who had never spoken his name. This isn't just a story of a return. It's a story of a wounded heart that never stopped beating. And it all began on a quiet afternoon on the 28th floor, where a woman discovered she was carrying something that would change her life forever. From the 28th floor of a glass tower in the heart of New York, the late sunlight pierced through the thin clouds, casting soft rays onto the marble wall of a modern kitchen. In the stillness, Rachel Connor stood frozen, eyes locked on the two clear, red lines on the small pregnancy test in her hand. No sound broke the silence, just absolute stillness, making her feel as if the entire world was holding its breath with her. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from hope. A miracle was happening inside her, a life, a future, a wonder. She gently pulled at her white lab coat, still faintly scented with antiseptic from a long shift at Mount Grace Hospital. She was a heart surgeon, used to racing pulses and the edge between life and death. But at this moment, what she felt was more fragile and sweeter than anything else: the joy of becoming a mother. She glanced around the kitchen, the same place that had once witnessed warm evenings between her and Michael Gosling, the man she loved, CEO of Dolan Technologies, a man always refined, always in control, and who had once made her believe their love was the most important thing in his life. Rachel carefully placed the pregnancy test on the marble counter. She took a deep breath, brushed her hair back, and smiled gently. She would tell him tonight. Everything would change, but in the most beautiful way. The door opened. Michael walked in, still in a sharp black suit, his tie slightly loosened as if just out of a long meeting. He looked tired, but not cold. She approached him, smiling, heart fluttering at the sight of him. "You're home," Rachel said, eyes sparkling. "I have something to tell you." Michael set his briefcase on the counter without looking at her. "Give me a second. Something important came up." She paused briefly, but remained patient. "This is important too. I think you should hear it first." He poured a glass of whiskey, took a sip, then turned to face her. His expression was unusually serious. "Rachel, the company is expanding to Hong Kong. The board approved the relocation plan. The first internal flight leaves next month." Rachel blinked. "You mean you're moving to Hong Kong?" Michael nodded. "I have to go. And there's one more thing. I will be marrying Olivia Dolan." The kitchen suddenly went so quiet that Rachel could hear the blood draining from her face. She thought she had misheard. "Olivia Dolan?" she whispered. "The daughter of Dolan Group's biggest investor?" Michael didn't respond immediately. He turned away, as if to avoid her gaze. "It's for the company. The marriage is part of the merger agreement." Rachel stepped back. She gripped the edge of the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "And what about me?" What about us, Michael? He sighed. I'm sorry, but we are no longer part of the equation. Rachel stared at him, eyes welling with tears. Do you know what I just found out? I'm pregnant, Michael. I'm carrying your child. For the first time, Michael froze. His eyes wavered for a second, but then, like a machine, he returned to the cold, detached face he wore in board meetings. I'll provide everything you need. This penthouse is yours. My lawyer will handle all the asset transfers and financial support. Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. You just abandoned the mother of your child. You gave up your family, Michael. And all you say is, I'll provide? Michael didn't reply. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the door. Take whatever you need, he said, hand on the doorknob. Just please don't contact me again. You can't even look at me one more time, Rachel choked out. Don't you want to know how this child will grow up? What kind of life they'll have? Michael paused for a moment, but he didn't turn around. It's better not to. And then the door closed behind him. Softly, but mercilessly. In the suffocating silence that followed, the warm kitchen lights seemed to dim. Rachel stared at the test, still there, with its two clear red lines. No sound, no signal. But it felt like an invisible line had been drawn between past and future. She stood there for a long time. No crying, no screaming, only a spreading emptiness in her chest. Then her phone buzzed. It was Ellen Green. Rachel hesitated, then answered. Rachel, are you home yet? I just saw the news about Michael and Olivia on the business channel. Are you okay? Rachel closed her eyes, took a deep breath. He's gone, she whispered. I'll explain later. I have to get back to the hospital. There's still a surgery tonight. The white coat was worn once more. Her shoulders still trembled, but they stood straighter now. She had 9 months ahead to prepare for motherhood, but right now, another heart was waiting to be saved. Across the city, neon lights began to glow, like the veins of a giant organism. Rachel didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing. The child inside her was not the ending. It was the beginning of a journey where she would no longer be the victim of a powerful man, but the mother of a genius yet to be born. She exited through the side door, the night wind slipping through her coat like a cold reminder of reality. Her car waited in the basement, but her hands shook as she placed the key into the ignition. The engine roared, headlights casting onto the concrete wall ahead, and Rachel pressed the gas. She didn't know where she was going. Not the hospital. Not Ellen's. Just away, as if motion was the only thing keeping her heart from shattering. Streetlights flew past the windshield like falling stars, and finally, she couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears spilled, silently, then uncontrollably. She sobbed like a child, hands on the wheel, vision blurred. Michael's face, the smile that once melted her, now cut through every memory like a blade. How could you? She whispered through her tears. After everything, how could you leave me? Leave your child? A soft cramp in her abdomen startled her. She placed her hand on her flat belly, where a small life was forming. It was the only anchor holding her back from the edge. She remembered the nights they lay side by side, Michael whispering dreams of a lakeside home, of children's laughter. That dream had now been sold for control of a corporation. Rachel slowed down and pulled over. She rested her head on the steering wheel, breath heavy. In that moment, she felt like she was free falling. No arms to catch her, no one calling her name in the dark. But then, a long, deep breath. Her hand tightened on the wheel. She wiped her tears, lifted her head, and looked into the rearview mirror. Her face streaked with tears, but her eyes starting to shine again. I won't let my child grow up in the shadows of silence and abandonment, she said softly, like a sacred vow sent into the universe. And with that promise, she restarted the car and turned toward the hospital, where a surgery was waiting, where life still needed her, a doctor, a mother, and soon, a warrior. And Michael Gosling, the man who chose power over love, would soon have to face the consequences. But he didn't know that. Not yet. But not every battle begins in the boardroom. Some begin in the night, with tears, with silence, and with a heart unsure where to lean for strength. On the first night after Michael left, Rachel didn't sleep. She sat by the bedroom window, where the city lights stretched out like a river of endless illumination, and let herself sink into thoughts without beginning or end. Inside her was a storm, hurt, anger, emptiness, but blended with it was a strange calm, like the moment just before a heart flatlines, when everything might be saved or vanish forever. The next morning, Rachel returned to Mount Grace Hospital. No one said anything, but the glances from a few longtime colleagues told her they had seen the news. The photo of Michael and Olivia on the morning cover of a financial magazine showed perfect smiles, as if no one had been left behind. Ellen Green, her longtime friend and colleague, was waiting in the on-call room. She said nothing, just opened her arms. Rachel stepped into that embrace like someone swept away, finally rescued from the waves. "You're not alone," Ellen said. "We'll figure it out, whatever it takes." Rachel nodded, silent, but gratitude filled her eyes. Ellen was the only one still standing when Rachel's world had collapsed. The weeks that followed felt like an endless stretch of time. Rachel worked while quietly preparing to become a mother. Morning sickness lingered. Fatigue struck between surgeries. And young nurses looked on with sympathy and hesitation. She said nothing. She had no time to explain. Each day that passed was another heartbeat from the baby inside her, another reason not to fall apart. After work, Rachel often sat in her office, hand resting on her belly, reading up on prenatal health and reviewing financial reports. What no one knew was that beyond surgeries and pregnancy, she had begun laying the groundwork for a long-term project, a fund to support heart surgeries for war veterans, a project inspired by the patients who had once been on her operating table, men who gave their youth to their country, only to live with illness in silence. The plan started small. One grant application, one medical article, one short speech at a local medical conference. But Rachel had something no one else did, a drive forged from loss, from betrayal, and from a love never returned. By the 6th month of pregnancy, she could barely conceal her belly beneath her white coat. During an emergency operation, a male patient in his 50s, a veteran from Iraq, looked at her in awe. "Doctor, you're pregnant and still doing heart surgery on me?" Rachel smiled gently. "We're both fighting to stay alive, you and I. both trying to keep someone's heart beating. He nodded, eyes brimming. Thank you. I think this is the first time I've felt like I deserve to keep living. That sentence stayed with Rachel. It became the headline of her grant proposal, fighting for the hearts that once fought for us. Near the end of her pregnancy, Rachel began to feel the soft kicks more clearly. Each movement was a reminder that she was no longer living for herself. She began recording voice diaries, messages for her unborn child. Hello, my love. I know you can't hear everything clearly yet, but I want you to know you came into my life at a moment I thought I was broken, and you gave me the strength to stand up again. Even when everyone else turned away, I had you. We don't need anyone else to start a legacy, just you and me, together. In the 39th week, on a stormy night, Rachel was quickly eating a sandwich in the on-call room when the emergency alarm sounded. A critical heart surgery case had just arrived. She stood up without hesitation, despite the swelling in her legs and the constant back pain. Ellen pulled her back. You're already on maternity leave. Let someone else take the shift. Rachel shook her head. I need to do this. The patient's a veteran with end-stage heart failure. I've followed his case from the beginning. I have to be the one. In the operating room, under cold lights and the rhythmic sound of machines, Rachel stepped in like a warrior. Each incision, every stitch, flawless and precise. Only when she placed the final suture did a sudden, violent contraction force her to double over next to the table. Are you okay? Ellen cried out. Rachel panted. I think I'm in labor. What followed happened like a storm. Doctors and nurses rushed in, wheeling her down the hallway. Her hair was drenched in sweat, but her eyes remained incredibly focused. How's the patient's heart? She asked, even as the anesthetic was being administered. He's stable. You saved him, Ellen replied, holding her hand. Rachel smiled, for the first time in days. Now it's time for my little heart. After 14 hours of labor, under the soft light of the delivery room, Ethan Connor let out his first cry. A clear, ringing sound that echoed like the overture to a new chapter in Rachel's life. She looked at him, eyes red with tears, but overflowing with love. So tiny, so strong. His little hand wrapped around her finger, as if he already knew she was his whole world. Hello, my love, Rachel whispered. We're going to be okay, I promise. A few weeks later, Rachel returned to the hospital, not as a patient, but as a surgeon, back on the front lines. Ellen greeted her in the lobby, holding a fresh folder. This is the list of veteran patients you registered. I held them off like you asked. But now, I guess you're ready? Rachel nodded. She looked down at her name badge. There was still a faint scent of baby formula on her coat. More ready than ever. She clutched the folder tightly, her eyes shining. Behind her, in a small office, Ethan lay peacefully in his bassinet, stirring gently. A young doctor walking by glanced in and asked, Who's that? Rachel turned and smiled. My son, the one who reminds me every day why I'm not allowed to fall. And with that, she stepped into her first surgery since giving birth. Not just to save a life, but to begin rebuilding a world her son deserved to grow up in. Because some battles aren't fought with gunfire or in courtrooms. They unfold quietly. In every step taken, every line of paperwork, every seemingly small decision, but with the power to change an entire fate. Spring skies painted New York in a gentle golden hue. 2 months after Ethan was born, the city seemed different. Not because of new skyscrapers or metro lines, but because Rachel's view of the world had changed. Every morning, after nursing Ethan and placing him in the crib nestled in the corner of her office, Rachel would don her white coat, tie her hair back, and step into the operating room as though she'd never paused for a moment. Though fatigue still crept in, she maintained absolute precision, a trait that earned both admiration and respect from her colleagues. But what no one at Mount Grace knew was that after every shift, when the OR lights dimmed, Rachel didn't go home. She stayed at the hospital, opened her laptop, and began her second job, tracking the stock movements of Dolan Technologies. Since her pregnancy, Rachel had quietly built a network of shell companies, small, inconspicuous funds. Under those names, she began buying Dolan shares, bit by bit, no urgency, no noise. But every move was deliberate. Each share she acquired was a silent link in a chain of retribution, not to bring Michael down out of pain, but to protect Ethan from a future manipulated by a man who once chose to abandon his own child. As for Michael, he wasn't unaware of the shifts. But among dozens of shareholders and strategic investors, the name Wren Equity, one of the legal entities behind Rachel, was just a drop in the financial ocean. He had no idea that every time he signed off on a restructuring or launched a new funding round, a silent set of eyes was watching from afar. No one suspected a thing. Rachel was still the dedicated surgeon, the part-time lecturer at the medical school, the single mother who never missed a vaccination appointment. But behind that calm exterior, she was building a world Michael would never set foot in again. 1 year later, Ethan turned 1. He was learning to pull himself up in his crib and had a particular fondness for low-frequency sounds, like a heart monitor. Ellen often joked, "He's going to be an even better doctor than his mom." Rachel smiled, but she knew her son wasn't just an angel. He was the center of the entire strategy she was quietly executing. Around that time, Claire Gosling, Michael's mother, reached out to Rachel. The first call was hesitant, cautious. But the meetings soon followed, quietly, discreetly. Claire didn't defend her son. On the contrary, she apologized, not for Michael's leaving, but for staying silent far too long. "I can't change the past," Claire said, her voice low and sincere. "But I can make sure Ethan doesn't pay the price for terrible decisions." From then on, Claire became the bridge. She didn't interfere in Rachel's plans, but helped her understand the inner workings of Dolan Technologies. The board, internal factions, pending contracts, everything Rachel needed to move smartly without drawing attention. Rachel didn't strike quickly. She chose patience. She partnered with healthcare organizations, appeared regularly at professional conferences, and gradually, her name became synonymous with regenerative cardiac medicine. When Ethan turned 3, Rachel published a groundbreaking study. Using AI to personalize cardiac treatment protocols for veterans, reducing post-op complication rates by 40%. Medical journals hailed it as a milestone in modern healthcare. Few knew the core software, developed by a team of engineers, had an honorary co-founder, Ethan Connor, listed under inspiration. At this point, Ethan could already solve basic math problems. Rachel discovered his exceptional memory and nearly flawless spatial reasoning. Quietly, she had him take internal IQ assessments. Result: 164. She wasn't surprised. She simply sighed and gently told him, "Don't let anyone think you have to be like your father. You'll be more than that." One late afternoon, while Rachel was preparing a lecture, Ellen entered with a stack of documents. "You'll want to see this," she said, placing them on the desk. Dolan just announced a new preferred stock offering, timed strategically. Rachel scanned the numbers, then nodded silently. It's time to accelerate. She called her financial lawyer, the one who'd helped her build the fund while she was still pregnant. "I want to acquire the full offering. Split it into 3 entities if necessary. The connection must remain untraceable." That evening, while putting Ethan to sleep, Rachel sat by the crib, brushing his soft hair. In the glow of the nightlight, his face looked angelic. "I'm building you a future no one can take from you. One day, when you know the truth, I want you to be proud that I never backed down." 6 months later, Rachel officially owned 9.4% of Dolan Technologies, more than any other individual shareholder, combined with the 2% transferred from Claire, her declared gift to my only grandchild. Rachel now held 15.6% silent control. Not enough to dominate, but enough to shift everything if she spoke at the right moment. And Rachel knew that moment was near. She didn't need revenge. She only needed Michael to understand that the woman he once left behind hadn't just survived. She had built an empire he would never reach. And Ethan would be the one to close the door on that denied past, not with anger, but with excellence that couldn't be ignored. As for Rachel, when she looked into the mirror each morning, she saw only one thing. Silence is the sharpest form of retaliation, and she had wielded it like an art. Because not everyone sees the power of silence until it echoes beneath the stage lights. And that night, in New York, silence became a voice no one could ignore. So, the National Medical Conference Center in New York was glowing with light. Carpeted halls buzzed in preparation for the gala night of the American Cardiology Summit, a gathering of the world's brightest minds in cardiovascular medicine. Tonight, they weren't just honoring scientific achievements, but also welcoming stories with the power to heal. Not only patients, but those behind the scalpel. Rachel Connor stood before the mirror, adjusting her pale lipstick. Her emerald evening gown hugged her figure just enough to be elegant, yet modest. Beside her, Ethan, now 6 years old, stood in a tiny tuxedo, his eyes sparkling like 2 pieces of glass. When Rachel's name was called, the entire hall rose to their feet. She walked onto the stage, hand in hand with Ethan, the spotlight casting down on their silhouettes, one tall, one small, both radiating a calm that shook the room. Rachel accepted the microphone and swept her gaze across the packed auditorium. 6 years ago, I stood in a sterile white room, at the edge of life and loss, and I asked myself if I had anything left to lose. Then I heard the heartbeat of another life, small, fragile. And from that moment, I knew I had to keep going. This is my son, Ethan Connor, the reason I'm able to stand here today. The room was silent for a beat, then erupted in applause. At the back of the auditorium, an unofficial guest sat quietly. Michael Gosling, CEO of Dolan Technologies, attended as an honorary representative of an anonymous donor to the American Heart Association. No one paid much attention to him, except for a few curious glances. But when Rachel stepped onto the stage, and Ethan appeared beside her. Michael's shoulders sank. He hadn't expected to see his son for the first time like this, under the lights, before the world, in a moment that could never be taken back. 2 days later, in the main boardroom of Dolan Technologies in Hong Kong, a special shareholder meeting was held. Although the official agenda was to announce a medical AI partnership, the atmosphere was tenser than usual. A minority shareholder had unexpectedly requested to speak. That shareholder was Dr. Rachel Connor, representing 15.6% of shares, including those transferred from Claire Gosling, Michael's mother. The room fell silent as Rachel entered. The air was thick enough to slice. Michael sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Rachel placed a USB drive on the table. A technician quickly connected it to the large screen behind her. The video began to play. Ethan at his desk, solving a string of algorithms related to artificial heart valve structures. Then a scene of him playing in the garden with his grandmother Claire. Laughter and warm conversation filling the air. Rachel turned to the board. "This is Ethan Connor, my son, and also the son of Michael Gosling." The room burst into hushed murmurs. Michael's face went pale. Some board members whispered to each other, the rest remained silent. Rachel continued, "I'm not here to demand justice. I don't need anyone to apologize. I just want you to know, someone once ignored, along with her unborn child, is here, not to destroy, but to build." She paused, then looked at Michael. "And as the shareholder holding 56%, including the stake from Claire Gosling, I vote in favor of the board restructuring proposal and the removal of Michael Gosling from his position as CEO of Dolan Technologies." The room went dead silent. Some board members scribbled notes. Others exchanged glances. No one objected. They all knew, if Rachel had spoken out loud, the backroom alliances had already been sealed. Michael said nothing. He simply sat there, as if all the sound had been drained from his chest. For the first time, he was silent, not out of calculation, but because he had nothing left to say. Rachel gave a slight nod. "I don't need to destroy. I just need to correct what was once wrong." Then she stood and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind an empire shaking at its foundation. On the flight back to New York, Rachel sat by the window, Ethan asleep in her arms. The cabin was quiet, but in her mind, each decision, every look from the boardroom replayed like a slow-motion film. She recalled the moment Michael's eyes cracked when he heard Ethan's name. She didn't feel triumphant, only sorrow. For a man who had everything, yet chose to abandon the most important thing. A flight attendant handed her a cup of tea. She nodded in thanks. Rachel opened her tablet and pulled up a folder containing scholarship files she was funding under the Claire Gosling Foundation, a fund she and Claire had established before her passing. The foundation didn't just carry Michael's mother's name. It was a quiet, sincere act of redemption from a woman who couldn't save her son, but made sure her grandson had a rightful future. She opened an unread email from the dean of a major East Coast medical school. Ethan Connor, though still young, is on a development path that suggests he could become the youngest ever accepted into the National Medical Talent Program. Rachel chuckled softly, brushing Ethan's hair. "Take your time, kiddo. I'm in no rush. As long as you do what you love, that's enough." In the following weeks, the public buzz didn't fade. Rachel received interview requests from all directions: television, financial publications, medical journals. She declined most of them. She didn't want her son's life turned into a media spotlight, but there was one she accepted: a program focused on humanistic medicine. During the taping, the host asked, "What do you think about being called the woman who made a CEO lose everything?" Rachel smiled faintly, her eyes tired. "I didn't make anyone lose anything. I simply kept what rightfully belonged to my son." Those who lose often do so because they made the wrong choice from the start. The quote spread like a quiet wave, not dramatic, not loud, but deeply resonant. Many women messaged her, thanking her for making them feel like they too could rise and fight for what was right for their children. One late afternoon, while Ethan was coloring a diagram of the circulatory system in the living room, Rachel received a hand-delivered parcel. Inside was a thick envelope and a letter, documents left by Claire Gosling, open only when truly necessary. Rachel held the USB, unsure. She hadn't planned to revisit the past, but her maternal instinct compelled her to look. When she opened the files, she froze. Full documentation of the merger between Dolan and various investment funds, proving Michael had forged share documents dated after Rachel found out she was pregnant. If Rachel revealed this, Michael could face criminal investigation. She closed the laptop and sat quietly. Perhaps Claire had wanted her to have a choice. Maybe she hadn't just protected her grandson, but wanted her son to learn his final lesson in the harshest way. Rachel did nothing. She simply wrote a letter, printed it, and sent it to Michael's private address. "I know everything, but I won't act. Not for your sake, but for Ethan's. I want my son to grow up in a world where justice doesn't need to be shouted. Live in a way that's worthy of this mercy." Then she deleted all the data, not out of forgiveness, but because she chose what was right, the way she hoped her son would one day do, too. An empire not built on power, but on dignity. A truth revealed not to wound, but to pave the way for a new chapter. And the one who paved that way was Rachel Connor. When truth finally speaks, the strongest one is not the one who seeks revenge. It's the one too busy building a better world from the very place they were once broken. It was early a Monday morning in New York, and the campus of Mount Grace Hospital was bathed in golden sunlight. Inside the research facility, the cardiovascular laboratory had been renamed Claire Gosling Center for Medical Innovation, a name that made those who once knew Rachel smile gently. No one called her simply Dr. Connor anymore. She was now Dr. Rachel Connor, pioneering researcher, co-founder of the Veteran Cardiac Intervention Program, and mother to a prodigy who had caught the attention of the entire medical field. Ethan, now 9, entered the room wearing a child-sized white coat and holding a thick notebook. Today was a special day. The Interinstitutional Scientific Board was visiting to evaluate the trial phase of the artificial heart valve model Ethan had helped design. "Do we have the data ready, Mom?" he asked as he approached Rachel. She smiled and bent down to adjust his name badge, Dr. Ethan Connor, Junior Contributor. "Everything's ready. Just do what you always do. Not more, not less." Ethan nodded. His small hand gripped the edge of the table, but his eyes were steady. Just like the first time Rachel had held his hand on the gala stage, only this time, Ethan stood alone. The meeting ended with thunderous applause. Professor Marshall, once a harsh critic of child prodigies disrupting medicine, was the first to stand and shake Ethan's hand. Rachel, standing at the back, felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over her. On their way out, Ellen came rushing up, clipboard in hand and eyes sharp as ever. "Did you see the news this morning?" Rachel shook her head. Ellen showed her the screen. Headline bold and clear. Former Dolan Technologies CEO spotted volunteering in Southeast Asian hospitals. A video played. Michael, unshaven and wearing a volunteer vest, was handing out medication and documenting information for a young girl at a rural clinic in Thailand. The CEO aura was gone, but there was something more real. Ellen turned off the screen. "Are you going to reach out?" Rachel didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what she felt, only that the anger was gone, and she no longer needed answers. "No," she said after a moment, "but my son has the right to." At Mount Grace, a quiet ceremony was being prepared. The hospital board had decided to rename the adult cardiac surgery department as the Rachel Connor Institute of Humanistic Medicine, not just to honor a doctor, but to recognize a different path in medicine, one that began with the most wounded heart. Rachel didn't speak much. She simply said, "Some wounds don't need healing. They need remembering, because they teach us how to become healers." The event ended under the soft glow of sunset. Ethan stood beside his mother, holding not a medical folder nor a tablet, but a blueprint for a new heart valve design. "Can I show you?" he asked. Rachel opened the sketch, scanning through it until she stopped at a detail in the bottom left corner. Not her name or Ethan's, but a handwritten line. "In memory of Grandma Claire. Thank you for keeping the light on so we could follow." Rachel said nothing. She simply pulled Ethan into a tight hug. A month later, at an international conference in Paris, Rachel took the stage as the keynote speaker. This time, her talk wasn't about techniques or breakthroughs. It was about the human heart in modern medicine. "I'm not here because I'm better than anyone else. I'm here because I never walked away. Not from patients, not from loved ones, not from myself." The hall fell silent. In an age of AI and data-driven care, everyone knew there are still things technology can't replace. A heart big enough to carry pain and strong enough not to be consumed by it. On her final night in Paris, Rachel opened her laptop. A quiet email waited in her inbox. From Michael Gosling. Subject: "Thank you for keeping him safe, if one day you'll allow it. I'd like to meet our son." Rachel didn't reply. She simply forwarded the email to Ethan with a short note. "It's your choice. I trust you." A week later, during a light afternoon rain, Rachel was organizing teaching materials when Ethan knocked on her office door. He entered holding his tablet, looking more serious than usual. "Mom, I think I want to meet him. Not because I need a father, but because I need to end the unanswered questions." Rachel looked up, her eyes softening. "Are you sure? What if you don't get the answers you want?" Ethan nodded. "Then at least I'll know I tried. Like in experiments, the outcome isn't as important as doing it right." Rachel smiled and pulled a chair beside her. "Then start with a letter. You don't have to say everything. Just say what's true." A week later, the letter was sent. Not long after, Michael replied, For the first time, he didn't speak about himself. He only asked, "What do you want to know?" From there, short letters were exchanged. Not many, not deep, but enough to build a bridge made of truth. Ethan didn't call him Dad. Hey. Rachel didn't push him. She knew. Everyone defines family in their own way. But in Ethan's eyes, she saw that a part of his soul had been released, not to forgive, but to be free. During that time, Rachel began writing a book, not about medicine or research, but about healing from things that couldn't be fixed. She titled the manuscript, "The Heart That Wasn't Whole, but Was Kind Enough to Live." Sick. 3 years later, a 12-year-old boy stood in an operating room, masked, beside the lead surgeons during a simulation session. He didn't hold the scalpel. He simply gave instructions on the monitor, and the entire surgical team followed. Outside the glass doors, down the hallway, a man stood watching but didn't enter. Ethan saw him, said nothing, and gave a slight nod. The man smiled, then walked away. One last time, and there inside that stark white room, where hundreds of lives had been saved, a new empire was being built. Not one of power or fame, but one of legacy, born from hearts that refused to break. A woman, a child, and a generation that understood the greatest things often begin from the smallest place. A heart that once hurt, but never stopped beating. One walked away, one stayed. A child grew up in the silence between them and chose to build something beautiful instead of searching for someone to blame. They didn't need victory to seek revenge. They only needed to live with dignity. Because some wounds don't need to be healed, they just need to be turned into light to lead the way. And that alone is enough to call it an empire born of the heart.